How to fix a puncture.
Okay, first thing we need to do is we need to remove the wheel. Now the thing is, we need to disconnect the V-brakes on the bike. Okay, so we need to release the brake to be able to get the wheel out of the bike. So it makes it easiest for us to put the wheel back in again when the tyre's inflated, and then obviously it won't rub on the brake blocks if we're trying to screw it through, or you'll knock the brake blocks out of alignment. So what we need to do is open it. Now you don't need to generally do any sorts of adjustments. You've actually got a quick release mechanism at the top here, but it can be a little bit fiddly. So what we first of all do is this dust cover just lifts off, and then as you can see you've got this little, and we call it a top hat because it's thicker on the inside than it is on the outside. It looks a little bit like a top hat. So what we need to do now is get some slack on the brakes. So we actually have to close the brakes together. So normally what I would do here is I would put my hands over the two of them and squish the brakes together, but I want you to see what I'm doing, so you'll need to, obviously I'll do it a slightly different way. So normally squeeze the brakes together and then this will lift out. What you don't want to do is pull on this hard because it's only aluminium and you'll bend it, and if you bend it the cable won't go through it, and then you'll have to buy a new one. So really important to be gentle with this if you can. Okay, so I'm putting two fingers on this side because I'm protecting the curve, one finger on this side. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to cheat a little bit and I'm going to pull on it, but if you can avoid doing that it would be great. And then I'm going to push that brake across. Okay, and what that's doing is there's a little slot in the top of it which the cable goes through, okay, and then there's a hole, and this little top hat sits in that hole, and as you can see it's larger here, and that's what rests on the back of this metal plate here. So I'm going to push it across, that goes in there, and that's it in place, and then push it across, pull it down, and then that's off, and then the brake is open, and it's really easy to get the wheel in and out then. So the next thing we need to do is we need to remove the wheel from the bike itself. Now I've already done it, but just make sure that your chain is on the smallest cog. Again, when you go to put it back in again, you haven't got to remember what gear it was on, so the gear mechanism needs to be in the right place. It's always going to be on the smallest one, and it's the easiest one with the slackest part for the chain. So undo the quick release lever, or if you've got nuts and bolts, obviously undo the bolts. Pull the gear mechanism back. Now it looks like I'm touching the adjuster, but I'm actually touching the piece just below it, and I'm just pulling that gear mechanism out of the way, and then the wheel drops out. Just lift that off of there and we're ready to take the tyre off. Okay, so the wheel's off now and we need to take the tyre off of the wheel. So we're going to start, and I'm going to show you how to let the inner tube down if it's only partially down at the moment. If you grab your tyre lever and you just want the little pointy bit on the end, and you just gently put that up inside the valve. Okay, so you saw me squeeze the tyre there. That was to stop the valve from going up inside the rim, because it can just be a bit of a pain to sort things out that way. Now, what you need to do next is just give the tyre a bit of a squeeze. Okay, and we call this breaking the seal, because if it's been wet or it's been on there for a long time, the rubber will adhere itself to the side of the rim. So you need to break that seal, and I'll show you the inside of the rim and why we do that a little bit later when we've got the tyre off. So make sure the tyre is pretty much loose and sat in the middle of the rim, and we get our tyre lever, and just to the side of the valve and above a spoke, hook it in, and then hook that round the spoke, and that will hold that in place for you while you get your second tyre lever. And then with that one you shouldn't need to hook that one on, because this is now the working one. So I've gone one side of the fixed tyre lever, and then I'm going to go to the other side of the tyre lever, and now that should actually be quite loose, and you should be able to literally slide the tyre lever around the rim and that is one side of the tyre off. Now what you do then is lift the tyre out of the way and press on the valve, and then you can just wiggle it a little bit and you can get the valve out of the rim. And if you pull it down, that'll then come out. Now hold it in the same position as it came out of the tyre. If you do this, when we go to find the hole in a second, it'll give us an idea of where that is on the tyre for when we're searching for whatever has given us the puncture. So what I'm going to do now is keeping this the same way round. I'm going to put the wheel there, and I'm going to keep the inner tube the same way that it was inside the tyre. Get our pump. And we inflate the inner tube. Now what you want to do is get the inner tube up to a tiny little bit bigger in diameter than it was inside the tyre. That way any holes that are in there will be a little bit bigger, and you should be able to pick it, or we should be able to hear it or feel it when we go round the tube in a second. So still keeping it the same way round, what I'm going to do now is just on the outside of the inner tube is pass it by my ear, and you'll listen and hear for the puncture, and it's there. Okay, next I'll get a pen or something similar, and I will mark where that puncture is. Okay, so we've got a little cross there. So what I'll do now is put that up onto the wheel and look at where that hole is. And on this one it's at approximately 5 o'clock. So putting the inner tube to one side for a second, because this punch is not going to get any worse than it already is. I'm then going to lift the tyre off of the rim, and again same way round. So what I'm looking for is probably going to be about here. I'm just going to move my hands around the tyre until I find what's caused it. Once I find what's caused it, grab your tyre lever again, and if it's a thorn, obviously be very careful because you don't want to catch it on your fingers. If it's a piece of stone or something, you may only just feel the top of it. So you get your tyre lever and you press from the inside so that you can see it on the outside. Often they're quite conical, so they'll go in with the sharp end first, and the outside will be a little bit bigger, so you'll find that they'll actually start to lift out, and often you can actually flick at them with your finger and it will draw it out. If it's a thorn, generally break it off and do the same thing and press it through. It might take you a little while to get it out, but just keep on pressing at it, and with your thumbnail, or if you've got a like a flat screwdriver or something, but don't go stabbing at the tyre because you'll just rip the tyre and then you won't be able to use it. Now you found the one puncture. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep going around the tyre just in case there's a second, because it is really annoying when you repair one puncture and then you suddenly find actually there are two. Okay, so I can't feel anything else in there, so what I'm going to do is, you can either just put this to one side, but generally, so I don't damage the rim, what I'm going to do is put this back onto the wheel. Now I said earlier that I would show you why I put the tyre into the middle of the rim, and if you look here you can see that in the middle of the rim it's really low, and this outside piece is where the tyre actually sits when you inflate it. So putting it into the middle means you've got a lot of slack on the tyre, and it'll make it much easier to take it on and off. And I see so many people, and very experienced people, not doing that and then really struggling to actually get a tyre off. And sometimes you can even do it by hand. You don't even need tyre levers if you just make sure you put it into the middle of the rim. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is checking that the tyre is the right way round. So if you look at this one, it's sort of got an arrow when I'm looking down on the top of it, and that would be the direction that you want it to roll. So on this one the gears are on this side and going forwards is this way. I'm going to put the bottom of the tyre into the rim, and then I'm just going to hook that over. Now the first side is normally very easy because there's not a lot of stuff in the middle of that rim, so that will go on nice and simply. Right, I'm going to put that to one side for a second, and now we're going to go back and we're going to deal with the puncture. Okay, so here we have the little cross where the puncture is, and the eagle-eyed amongst you will see that there's already been a puncture repair done on this inner tube. Now, some people may think that that's going to be the same thing that's caused it, but it isn't. It's too far away for that to have caused it, or if someone has put the inner tube back in the other way round, then that would be at 7 o'clock, which would put it much further around the inner tube. So we know this is a brand new puncture, and it's just been very unlucky that it's actually close to the last one. So what we're going to do now is get our puncture outfit, and inside our puncture outfit these days, ideally the ones to use are what they call the self-adhesive patches. Now with those, they're like plasters. They're already got glue on them already, and they're ready to go. And you've also got a small piece of sort of emery paper to scuff the inner tube up. Now remember, we inflated the inner tube earlier so that it was a little bit bigger than it needed to be. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to let the inner tube down to about the size that it will be inside the tyre. Now the reason for that is what we don't want is for the patch to be pulled and stretched, because then that will break the seal and you'll get the puncture again. We also don't want it to be too big, because otherwise when we contract it again, it'll bunch up and then it won't stick to the inner tube properly. So now we've got it to approximately the right size. We give it a good scuff up with some wet and dry, or some sandpaper, or a nail file, not the metal type. And then we've got our patch. So here you can see, I can still see just about where the hole is, and I'm going to get my patch, peel that off, and then stick that on. Put a bit of pressure on it to make sure that it actually sticks okay. Look for any creases, and there's none, so that's all good. Now it's really important to get this, if you can, either under pressure, under something, or back into the tyre as quickly as you can, because then we can inflate it, and then the pressure of the tyre and the tube together will help to stop that from coming unstuck while the glue goes off. Okay, so now we need to put the inner tube back inside the tyre. So here's our tyre, and our wheel that we had earlier. Now I need to find out where the valve hole is. Now generally it's opposite the reflector. So if I look, actually there's the valve hole for me. Now you guys won't be doing it this way round, so you'll obviously be standing directly in front of it, which will make it a little bit easier. So I'm going to let the inner tube down a little bit more, because I want to get it back inside the tyre, but I'm not letting it completely flat. Now I'm going to lift the tyre so that the valve hole's visible, and pop the valve in. Now with this, you don't need to worry about which way round the inner tube is. It doesn't matter if it goes in the opposite way round, because we found out what caused the puncture and we've taken that out. So this is like fitting a brand new inner tube, so there's no issues with it going in left or right, so to speak. Now once I've got that tyre tucked into the, inner tube tucked into the tyre, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to gently lift the inner tube over the rim. Okay, not the tyre, just the inner tube. And what you can see now is the inner tube. Hopefully you can see it's just tucked inside the rim. I'm then starting opposite the valve. As you can see, the valve's down here. I'm going to start to pull the tyre over the rim. Now initially you're going to get resistance from the inner tube that's in there, but don't worry, it will then, just once you get enough of the tyre on, it will then sit down behind the rim. Now I think I've got a little bit too much air in there because that's just trying to squeeze the inner tube out, so I'm going to take a little bit of air out of that. And you can do this while you're going along, it's not a problem. The reason you have it inflated is because it sits on the rim a little bit easier. That way you're not having to concentrate on the tyre and the inner tube at the same time to try and get it all together. Okay, so I've now got on to where I'm starting to feel the tyre get a little bit tight. So here it's starting to not want to go. Now we spoke earlier, or we said earlier, about making sure that the tyre is in the middle of the rim when you're trying to take it off. It's exactly the same when you're putting it on. You want as much slack in that tyre as you can get. Now we've got to the point where that's getting quite tight now. One tyre lever, you won't need two for this. What we're going to do is I'm going to hold the tyre here to stop it from trying to come off, and I'm going to put this tyre lever onto the rim here. Now this is really important. You lift the tyre up, lift tyre up, and you'll notice that the tyre lever isn't going up much beyond 90 degrees to the rim. If you go up vertically, you stand a chance of pinching the inner tube against the rim, and you'll give yourself another puncture, and those ones you can't repair. So really important that you just be very, very careful. Take your time. Okay, now when you're getting really close to the valve, see how the tyre feels. You'll feel that it wants to go on or not, and if it's feeling like it's going to go on and there's not much effort involved, then carry on going until last little bit, pop, and on she goes. If it feels a little bit tight, hold this side and then come to this side and then come towards the valve, but you end at the valve or just to the side of the valve. Now a lot of people will tell you to not do that because I've had bad experiences, but the reason you do that is because you have the most amount of slack in the tyre to get the tyre on and off. It's the easiest way to get the tyre on and off. The trick is, once you've actually put that on there, because what happens normally is the bead of the tyre will sit on top of the valve, and then when they pump the tyre up, it will lift the tyre off and it will cause it to go pop. If you've got a little bit of air in the inner tube, generally that doesn't happen, but we're also going to check by just pressing the valve and making sure that there's no resistance to it going up and down, which with this one there's not. You can also lift the beading out of the way and you can see whether the inner tube is actually showing at all on the side, which in this case it's not, so we're all good. So you get your pump, whichever pump you happen to have, and then you start inflating. So the trick is, it's check it a couple of times as you're doing it. So I'm going to put a little bit of pressure in this so it just starts to form its shape. And what I'm doing now is I'm looking around the rim, and on this one, I don't know if you'll pick it up on the camera, but there's a tiny little bit of beading there that you can see. I'm just checking that that's level all the way around the tyre and on the other side as well. What I'm looking for is that not to be sitting up out of the way of the rim or down low. Now that seems okay at the moment, so I'm going to go put a little bit more pressure in it. Okay, and we're getting close to where it should be now, and again I'm just checking, and that's good, and that's good. Now if you do get a point where that line is sitting below the rim, generally what's happening is where the tyre is sitting in the middle of the rim, it's not wanting to sit up on the sides. All you need to do is put a little bit of extra pressure into that, and then that will then lift it up onto that rim, and sometimes a little bit of washing up liquid will help with that as well, and it will just slide onto the rim. But do remember, if you put, say for instance these are designed for 40 psi, if you put 50 in it to get it to seat, then you must let it back down again to 40 psi because that's its operating pressure. Okay, and that's the inner tube back inside the tyre and ready to be put back on the bike. Okay, so now we need to put the wheel back inside the bike. Now this should be quite easy because obviously it came out nice and easy. It should go back in nice and easy. We just need to do things in reverse. So what you've got here is a loop of chain. Now what we're looking for is the cog to be sitting on the top loop of chain, which also sits just by this, what I call the upper jockey wheel, which is the one that's closest to the body of the gear mechanism. So what we do is I'll bring our wheel up. Remember earlier we said about bringing the gear mechanism back. Now this is a four-handed job, so we'll do it one step at a time. So what I've done there is I've put the lower loop of chain underneath the cog because we don't need that bit. I'm then going to put this part of the chain just in front of the jockey wheel here on the last cog that we spoke about. So obviously we're not trying to remember which cog it goes on, we just want it to be on the last one because it's the easiest one. I'm then going to pull the gear mechanism back, and you see now it's past the gear mechanism. I don't need to hold on to it anymore, and you can see the chain is starting to form the shape that it was previously. And then we're going to put the wheel back up inside the frame. And now I'm trying to juggle sliding this into the dropout. Now this is where your knee comes in handy. So I'm now going to lift this with my knee, or you might have the bike upside down, so you just wiggle it until that goes back into place. Now your quick release, I've just done a little bit of adjustment there, I've just tightened it very slightly, and then I'm going to close that quick release. Just holds it in place for a second while I go back to check it. What I'm going to do now is check that the wheel is back in the dropouts properly. So I'm going to undo the quick release and I'm going to lift the wheel so that I can feel it touching both sides of the frame, so I know it's central. If you don't do that, then your brakes might not be central, your gears might be out a little bit as well, and eventually the wheel will go back to that position, but if you've done anything to the gears to get them to work, it will then throw them out again. So always make sure the wheel goes back to where it wants to be, which is cleanly in the top of the dropouts. Right, once that's done, as you can see, now what we've got is lower part of the chain, upper part of the chain going around the cogs, and while we were messing around just at the front here, it's just starting to come off the cogs at the front. Now this particular time I can just turn the pedals and that'll put it back into place. If you can't do that, if you just simply put your gently underneath the chain and just put it back onto the cog that you want it onto, and then pedal it backwards a little bit, again it will go back onto the front chain ring without any trouble. Next we need to connect the brake up. So what I'm going to do here is just gently squeeze the brake together, loop it over, put the little rubber seal back on again, and then I'm going to check the brake, make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, and then I'm also just going to go through the gears and just make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing as well.
For more hint and tips, visit cyclingtoolbox.com.